All right, we get ready to go.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Genealogy Adventures. I'm Brian Sheffy.
And I'm Donya Williams. We're gonna have some fun today because y'all know I like to cook, and this is all about food.
We are foodie people.
Yes, yes.
So I'm going to jump. Hope that you all are having an amazing Sunday. Thank you, as always, for sharing the next hour with us. And I'm going to get right into it. So we have quite the show for you today. So pleased to welcome Tonya Hopkins, who's also known as the Food Griot. She's a culinary historian and nonfiction storyteller, a cocktail cognoscente. I'm going to have to ask her about that. And creator and host of the Food Griot shows, where she shares savory and sometimes sweet true stories behind the makings of America's cuisines and culinary scenes. She helped co-fund the nonprofit organization, the James Heming Society, with Chef Ashbel McLean, and to uphold the timeless Black culinary creativity that greatly influenced the development of American fine dining. Tonya is an active advisor on the Museum of Food and Drinks exhibition called the African American Making the Nation's Table. She served as the foremost food historian for the best-selling celebrity chef cookbook, Carla Hall's Soul Food, and for Harlem Hops, the nation's first 100% Black-owned beer, bar, and restaurant. Gonna have to ask you about that too. Tonya was the first food historian showcased on the long-running iconic ABC daily show, The Chew. She teaches wine education at the Black women-owned boutique wine shop in Brooklyn called Good Wine. She serves as the lead culinary history advisor for the Old Stone House of Brooklyn, and she works with many museums and cultural organizations throughout the region. Welcome to the show, Tonya, and where do you find time to do all that?
Right, right. Tanya, you're muted. Give me a sec. Let me see what's gonna happen. There you are.
All you missed was me laughing out loud to my question, because I was like, that is a good question. How do I?
You got a lot going on, lady.
You have a lot going on.
Yeah, I like to tell people, there's no such thing as a magical negress, and now I'm like, maybe there is. Maybe
Okay.
I am.
I think you are, and there is such a thing. They're called mommies. So
Yes.
they're called mommies. But I'm so glad to have you on the show. We had a really great conversation on Friday, and I told you that I was going to tell you on the show, and I'm gonna say it now because I know my family and friends that are up here, they already know. I am a macaroni and cheese connoisseur. I can cook it and I can eat it. So, with that being said, I want to know about all of the history of the collard greens because I'm telling you, Tanya, you get on my page, it's not gonna be hard to find food up there that I don't cook.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to know the history.
And Donnie will tell you will be the first one to tell you that I am also a mac and cheese connoisseur. Went to a restaurant with a cousin here in Maryland. They had mac and cheese on the menu, and I asked the waiter, who was African American, "Is this the macaroni and cheese that your South Carolina or Georgia grandma would make, or is this the stuff that's out of the box, the kind of noodles and like soup?"
Powdered cheese, add water. Yeah.
Man,
what was the answer?
That mac and cheese came out, and I sent it back.
You were like,
you have to.
Bad.
It was that bad.
You were like, this is not my grandmother's mac and cheese, nor yours. Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
No.
No, I know. It's a sad truth of it all. It's the sad truth of it all. How, I mean, the Industrial Revolution was bad enough, which is how we get the boxed version, which is a totally different I don't want to call it a facsimile. It's some kind of, I don't know. The etymology of it is this mac and cheese that we generations of our families have been stewards of, that we hold dear. But it does leaps over into a whole nother manifestation when it comes out that box. But
it really does. It's disgusting. My sister doesn't make it, and my mother is just like, one person said, "How do you make it creamy?" And I said, "Well, if I tell you, I'm gonna have to kill you afterwards." So that's
see,
that's not gonna work because I'm not trying to go down. So then, but my sister, she's not a cooker. Well, she wasn't. She's getting better with it now. But at first she wasn't when her boys were younger. And she made boxed macaroni and cheese one time and they looked at her and started crying.
Oh wow. Yeah.
So, it's not a game in my family. We do
no,
not.
I know, and I worry that that's going to die off. Not, that's not a good word to use, but you know what I mean. I worry that over time, what's going to happen is people just come to accept the modern, simpler versions of things. Simpler. For the sake of convenience, because the underlying culture of American culinary, if you want to call it culinary culture, is convenience, comfort, ease, instant, push a button. And it's become that more and more over time. There's always, divergent trends happening. But I really honestly worry that the stuff, I was born at a time where I knew relatives, I knew my great grandparents, both my great grandmothers and great aunts and great uncles. People lived, some people, there's some longevity in my family, people living into their 90s and stuff. So I knew people who, were born as early as 1898 or 1899. I might have been a teenager when they passed away, but it was like, but that's just like, that's 2 centuries ago from now.
Right.
And what they embodied, the way that they did things, they call slow food and slow cooking today, or returning to some of these older ways. I'm sorry, can you guys, is that noise in the background? Can you hear that?
You don't even hear it.
I hear something.
You hear it?
I hear
it. There's someone, I'm in a complex and there's someone in the hall vacuuming that I have no control over. You want me to switch to headphones? Will that help?
No, you're fine.
You're fine.
Okay. All right. Anyway, yeah. So, it's not just like, and then some of the things are just so out of our control, right? Like it's not just techniques, and it's also the actual ingredients and powers that be. When manufacturers and producers of things, they change things. They're businesses, right? So they want to save money and cut, and I'm somebody who reads ingredients on packages, and so sometimes stuff like you start to notice over time, the butter gets replaced with hydrogenated oil in a recipe. It's not really a recipe; it's a formula. I'm so tempted to ask him to not vacuum this floor right this second.
It's okay. You're good. You're good. I mean, if you want to put your headphones on, you can. If you think that'll cancel it out some.
I don't know. I think it should. Hold on one second. Just give me 1 second. You guys keep talking about the next recipe you want, the next dish you want to interrogate me about.
Okay.
Well, again, for me, and it sounds like it's the same for all 3 of us, and for many of us, our generation. I'm planting my flag in the 50. I'm 50-something years old. That gives you an idea of the generation I'm talking about. I grew up living in people's kitchens, so I had obviously my mom was a cook. Her mother and my father's mother were cooks. Then we have the great-grandmothers, because again, like Tonya, I'm the same. I was very fortunate and blessed to have at least 2 of my great-grandmothers until I was a teenager. And provided that, there wasn't grown folk talk happening, because, in Black households, when grown folks back in the day were having certain conversations, kids had to leave. Right. Was not for your ears. But if those conversations weren't happening, we were just hanging out in the kitchen, and that's how I actually learned how to cook. Was watching all of these women from 3 different generations cooking. And I started asking them questions. Why do you do this? Why do you have that? Why are these things paired? Why those spices and not this spices? And to this day, the thing that amazes me the most is I never saw them with measuring cups or measuring spoons. And that's
Wow.
actually how I learned how to cook. They would have like they would have their little tumbler or their little glass. They would fill it up with either the dry ingredients or the wet ingredients that they needed, and they would just throw it in the pot, pinch of this, couple of pinches of that. That's also how I learned how to taste food. People when I lived in England, people thought I was odd because I would actually put the food on my hand and then take a taste to see if it was salty enough, too salty. They're like, no, just put the spoon in. I'm like, I don't want your germs. First of all, I don't want your germs.
There are ways to do that. You just have to have a bunch of little spoons, a bunch of tasting spoons that you dip in. One time you put it aside. Professional kitchens can do that because they've got dishwashers, human dishwashers, and maybe more than one mechanical dishwasher. Home cooks are usually not trying to add dishes to the mix. So, but it's important to taste along the way.
Yeah, but that's actually a question I wanted to ask you, Tonya. Is that actually kind of an African American way of tasting food that you're cooking? Not to actually put a spoon that you just put in your mouth into what you're cooking, but to actually put it. Because again, I'm thinking about my great grandmothers. I think they were the first ones I actually clocked cooking that way.
Yeah, no, it is. I don't know that no other culture does it, but it's definitely an old school way of just kind of in a hygienic way, assuming that you're not, doing this, touching everything else. But yeah, no, that's a really good point. There's so many little subtle things like that, which are it's so important to watch. Matter of fact, earlier on Savory and Sweet today, Savory and Sweet Food History and Culture on Word, Progressive Black Media, Sundays at 9 a.m. I could be going on with that commercial, but Chef Ashbel McIlvaine, who is the founder of the Hemming Society, who I stepped in to help co-found the organization years ago, was talking about that. He was talking about learning, multisensory, three-dimensional learning, and when he was younger, cooking with a great aunt, I believe, and he's looking at her like, explain things. He's so focused on her mouth, talking to him and listening to the words. And she was like, why are you looking at my mouth? Why are you not watching what I'm doing? And it kind of just like took the blinders off. It was like a moment where he was like, oh, okay. And fast forward, that little boy, became a celebrity chef and an important culinarian, carrying on, making sure that narratives that were almost lost, seemingly lost, don't get lost and get written back in the story.
Yeah, you and I were talking about the potato salad before, and I was saying how when my mom, when she leaves this earth, I won't have potato salad no more because I cannot perfect it. But when you and Brian was talking about the tasting and on the hand, that made me think of my mom, because I'm gonna tell y'all right now, my mother makes her potato salad in the sink. I'm talking back in the day, hands in the, the whole things, mixing it in the sink, getting it all together, all of that. Y'all can say what you want. That's the best potato salad in the world.
Your mom probably still, if she were still making it, that's back when people sterilized their sinks and, made sure everything was clean. That's a whole nother. I cannot wait to do an episode about cleanliness in the kitchen as being an actual step in the recipe from a Black cultural code. Again, these are generalizations. You can't say that about everyone, but I do find a higher incidence of concern about, did you wash your hands? Is that counter before you even start to even dig into things? Is that pot clean? Is, just this really attention to detail on cleanliness. And I'm not a recipe cook. I inherited cooking skills passed down from my great grandmother, who was a direct descendant of plantation cooks from Maryland. But as a food historian and culinary historian and researcher and writer, I'm surrounded by books. They're like reference material, pleasure reading, clues, crumbs. And blueprints, and I do get ideas, but it's really hard for me to follow the recipe. But one thing I started to notice, I was like, when I first started reading cookbooks, I was like, well, where's the clean step?
Yes. I
Like,
know, like washing meat. Again, that's something else that my British friends thought that I was absolutely crazy about. Is I would, even if it was organic meat, I would take it out of the wrapper, put it under the faucet, rinse, really clean it well, and
oh
then
yeah,
I
we
would
would
season it
soak
and
that
start
in
cooking it.
salt water. We would soak it in salt water and then rinse it, and then all this extra stuff that I guess is not necessary today. I guess maybe they're processing things differently. I don't know. But yeah, that's also a Black thing, like cleaning the food products, making sure the area that you're cooking in is clean, just basic things that I just found to be I found it interesting as a young person a long time ago, reading that was just a given, that you just
Mhm.
assume that people knew to wash the vegetables off or whatever.
So my first actual question for you, and this is starting things off on a really simple kind of level, can you explain to the audience what a griot is and what a food griot is?
Something I made up. No, I didn't. I did not make the word real. But putting the two together is as a creative synthesis. I did not make up either words, obviously. But yes, griot is a word that came onto my radar. Actually, the family that founded Word Radio, WURD, the president and CEO, she years ago, when she started out in journalism, worked for a Black publication called I think it was just Griot, Griot, not the same as the one today, that platform. And it was it had Griot, and it had to do with, and then she moved on to one that had to do with health and wellness. Who cares for Black America? That was also a Black owned publication. And I just remember I think that might have been around the first time I was exposed to it. We also had some West African academic friends in my family growing up. I feel like somewhere between them and my college roommate who went off to take this job at the Griot, I was like, what is this word that is coming up? And I found out that it meant storyteller and historian and raconteur, fancy French word for storyteller. And it also means poet and musician, and which basically it's a storyteller through a creative medium, whether it's actual telling a story once upon a time, or telling a story through poetry or through music or other ways. But the important thing is about making sure that information doesn't get lost, like making sure that information, the right information, gets transferred from one generation to the next. And when I found out that it was a word that was affiliated with the part of the continent of Africa that the majority of African Americans descend from, descendants of enslaved people, West African region, because it's it's a Creole, African French Creole word, and I was like, well, this was before we had access to the access we have now to swabbing our cheeks and finding out exactly, where our DNA goes to. But I was like, well, I like that, and I also like the fact that it speaks to the oral tradition of not just the West African oral tradition of the griot, but also how the oral tradition takes on a whole new level here when we are imposed upon with illiteracy, by threat of harm, and death, not being able to legally read and write, and how getting word and the oral tradition that was already part of the cultural code of a lot of the people who were captured and brought here takes on to another meaning in terms of how we communicate. And the orators that we are today, that cultural code of oration, whether it's preaching or rapping or being a poet or just a talker. When I used to do qualitative focus groups for back when I was in corporate America once upon a time before I escaped, I remember clients would be like, wow, is it me, or do we never have to do should we just do only Black focus groups because they talk so much, and the richness and the story and the emotion and I was just like, no, just keep talking to everybody and pay attention to what you're paying attention to. But it's real. But just that's just it's a cultural thing, and it just seemed right. And I just felt that we I felt there was a conspicuous absence in the mainstream, as well as within our own culture, of really understanding what a big deal our connection to American foodways uh, was and still is, because of that investment of energy and time and creation that the ancestors did, whether we are aware of it or not, right? Um, and then when I start to learn ways that we were somehow systemically cut out from knowing what we had done and benefiting from what we had done, I was like, wait a minute, hold it now, wait a minute.
So that actually leads me to my next question. I caught a video of, it was a wonderful video where you were being interviewed, and you mentioned something that really sent me down a thought spiral. So putting the 1619 Virginia Africans just to one side for a moment, thinking about thinking about Africans who were brought here purposefully as slaves. When they got off of the ship and they were sent to wherever it was they were going to be enslaved, how did they work out what foods to eat? Were they looking for things that were kind of looked comparable to what they knew back home, and then for things that were completely foreign to them, like corn? How did they learn to incorporate all of those different foods that were here into their diet?
The fascinating thing about corn is that it was not foreign at all. Corn had been introduced to Sub-Saharan Africa, Western Africa, about a century before it was being used in European culinary techniques. That pre-Columbian exchange of food that was happening, whether it was stuff that was happening in they came before Columbus camp, and as well as the role that Black Africans played along with the Portuguese and the Spaniards in things that happened here in the New World. So we count from 1619, but if you recall in some of the, I believe Henry Louis Gates points out in at least one of his specials, going back into the 1500s, when you start looking into the settlements in Florida and the Gulf Coast and Texas into Mexico, and the role that African heritage people played there. And then if you look at the work of Professor out of Rutgers, I'm blanking on his name right now, Van Sertima, I believe, who there's a whole nother camp in terms of and then they were trading even before Europeans. So the point is corn, because this came up when I was researching the foods associated with Kwanzaa, and had an opportunity to, I'm told, was the first person who actually directly asked Dr. Milena Karenga about the foods associated with the holiday as he saw it, as he had conceived it. And corn was the first thing on my mind. I'm like, corn is, it's a new world. And he provided some information along with additional research that I was like, oh, wow. So all of those, that understanding of corn meals, working with corn, all the many different corn cakes that happened in the very early, that was one of the rations. So there's a couple of things that are happening here. Let me back up. The slave traders, the slave traders, they had already, through their observational research and whatever, had a sense of the crops that they were interested in transplanting. They knew about the crops that different African ethnic groups utilized or didn't utilize. There was before the transatlantic slave trade really becomes the horrible monstrosity that it becomes. There's trading and exchange happening with these African cultures and Portuguese in particular, Spanish, Dutch, and so they're paying attention, because it's all about ultimately what am I going to put where to make money and profit. So this stuff's all being thought through. They're also thinking about, once the transport of captive Africans becomes the main product, they're also thinking about, how do we keep them alive? How do we keep them at the minimal cost? What do we feed them? So they're paying attention to what people are already eating. They're substituting things. There's a goober there's something very similar to the peanut that is not exactly the groundnut that is similar to the peanut, but they're not exactly the same. But I guess peanuts became cheaper or something, so they switch it to peanuts, and then we adopt peanuts as something that we use the way we used groundnuts. Leafy greens, are something that not necessarily the same exact greens that were growing where they were coming from, but finding the non-poisonous leafy green substitutes, adopting things like cabbage and other cruciferous greens. Collards originally come out of North England, I believe. They're not even they're not one of the African ethnobotany plants.
So
Sweet
if I can just
potato,
jump in,
sweet potato, yeah. So it's a combination of them knowing and deciding, but then cornmeal becomes like the corporate food. It becomes the regardless of where the plantation is, whether it's the Caribbean or the South, that becomes the ration that's handed out, pork and cornmeal.
So was it a case of trial and error? Because I can imagine it's specifically something looks similar, but is actually poisonous. I mean, that could have been quite deadly for them.
It could have been, but we have to remember, people who at the time would have been more, yes, out of their element, but also in tune with techniques like paying attention to what other living creatures are eating, not eating, avoiding, not avoiding, depending on at what point in the timeline and where, and there were exchanges with indigenous people. There are accounts of similarities of fishing practices with some of the African groups brought here and the native groups brought here. Some of them were shipped over there. So there's that whole untold story too, in terms of like what types of information and wisdom was being swapped or exchanged. But they arrived with a full-on centuries worth of familiarity with corn and the many different ways that it could be used in meal, and they paid attention in terms of the leafy greens, and had to supplement those rations with hunting, fishing, foraging, and wherever possible, having their own gardens, growing things, because they just, feeding enslaved people was not always a priority. How they were going to be fed was a priority.
And this is a point that I really like to raise, considering the time period when this all started. So I know we think in terms of like 17th century and 18th century science as being fairly primitive, and some of it was. But even the British Navy, for instance, they had already made the correlation between nutrition and scurvy. And they obviously wanted to stamp scurvy out because it was bad for the people who served in the Navy. I struggle to understand how someone who enslaved Africans didn't understand that labor-intensive work, and these people were working pretty much from sunup to sundown, that good nutrition didn't play a part in some of their diet. And I'm not saying every enslaver was like this, but I'm reading accounts of those who were. How can you starve your workforce and expect them to work from sunup to sundown, unless you just don't care?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question to address, and one that comes up oftentimes. And yes, one of the reasons is that we tend to, we have to keep in mind that, this goes on over the course of centuries. There are different geographies, there are different practices, but the places where that did happen, it was common. It was much more common. Food was used as a, I don't want to say as a weapon, but it was just used to control or to incentivize or not incentivize. We had to basically, what happened? Oh,
you froze a little bit.
Oh, I froze. Sorry. We had to take it upon ourselves. Yeah, I can't answer that question, except that what baffled me, to be honest with you, is when I after doing the food associated with Kwanzaa piece for the Encyclopedia of Food and Drink in America, there were a bunch of unassigned entries, and they were like, "Oh, this was great. You want to do anything else?" And I was like, "Maybe." And I looked at the list of unassigned entries, and when I tell you, the word rum jumped off the page and said to me, "You will write me." I was just like, "Oh, okay." And I was trying to avoid it because I'm like, I don't have West Indian heritage that I'm aware of. I'm sure I've got DNA.
So just so our audience is aware that Tonya has been experiencing internet issues today. So we apologize for that.
Yeah,
is it my connection?
Yeah, I think you froze
Sorry.
again. You're good. You're good.
You're good. You're fine. I think after watching news stations for the last 2 years on Zoom, we're all kind of used to it.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's not that big of a deal. So you got a lot of people that's like commenting, and one of our he was actually a cousin of ours. So he said turnips come out of Europe, but we love turnips and mustard greens 1-to-1 in McCormick, South Carolina. So I mean, does turnip greens come out of Europe, or is it something else that we need to know? Because I'm a collard green fan personally.
Yeah, I'm a mixed green fan. I like turnips. I love mustards. No, I think mustards actually there is a version of them that are coming out of y'all gotta have me grabbing my African ethnobotany book. I am not a walking encyclopedia, and some of the stuff I have researched, 10, 15, 5, 4 years ago. But you start getting into genus species of things, and there are many different variations of things like alliums, is that what they're called? The onion, garlic, they grow all over the world. There are things but different versions of it, and I think that's the same case with the mustard green. But can I just finish that thought about the rum? The reason I brought that up is because what I discovered was the business model of the sugar industry was that was the engine behind the transatlantic slave trade. That's what kept it going, because the lifespan of a person working in the sugarcane fields, whether it was the sugar islands in the Caribbean or Brazil, parts of North South America, was 3 years. So because of the work conditions, people, whether it was the extremely dangerous conditions, it's a reed that can cut you. Plus, there's a lot of machetes involved. There's burning involved. There's mosquitoes. There's malaria. There's dehydration. There's overwork. There's heat exertion. All these things. 3 years. This is one of the first times I've been able to talk about this without choking up. So unlike in North America, where it became profitable to I need a better verb than breed, but to participate in increasing the population of your enslaved people in Virginia is the greatest case of that. In other parts of the slave societies of the New World, their solution was just to keep shipping people over here. So in that case, that answers your question, Brian, of not caring about the life, caring about a solution that they perceive to get the end result to feed the growing sweet tooth, so that people could put sugar in their tea and have biscuits, as the British say, which is their word for cookies. And it's heartbreaking. It's all of that. But so when you learn that was actually part of the model, the answer is they didn't care. But you look at the survival, not miraculous, but sometimes near miraculous. You look at how people still were able to, in certain enslaved societies, live to 113, 112, 107, roughly. But people were the face of the American centenarian was you or me for a really long time. And still, start paying attention when you hear the news about the oldest person dying. More often than not, it's an old Black woman, and sometimes an old Black man. And it's like, well, how did that happen? How were people living so long under those harsh conditions? All these terms that we that marketers want to trend up now, eating seasonally, farm to table, plant-based, primarily plant-based diet, meat in small just for seasoning and flavor versus it being the centerpiece. These are all things that African Americans were the pioneers of, and as well as eating the leafy greens. It's always interesting to me that people are quick to point out that collards come from these places, but there's no research to support that they actually ate them, that it was part of their cuisine, but that instead they were using it for feed, for animal feed and stuff. Those cruciferous. We were the ones who turned them into culinary delights.
And you also did an excellent job in the video that I saw. And again, it got me thinking about food in a different way. Now, Donnie and I talk about the fact that our Edgefield family is huge. And the reason why it's huge is because our ancestors and their relations were having double-digit kids every single generation. You gave a very practical example, though, of slaughtering a chicken to feed a family. So if you have two adults, you may have an elderly parent living in the household, other relations, and you have 6 or 7 kids. That chicken's only going to go so far. And you need those chickens because you need the eggs. You actually need the eggs more than you need to eat the chicken. But you have an old chicken, you slaughter it. Well, that's only going to feed so many people. That's not going to really fill your belly. And I thought you did a really wonderful job explaining how all of our side dishes kind of came into being to supplement the protein that they were getting from the meat. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you for that. God, even that, I'm like, where was I? Who was I talking to? I'm talking to the Belgian chef. Where were we? Were we in Harlem? Yeah, so, right. And if and when that chicken that old hen, that old old bird got killed, plucked, it was more often than not going to go into a pot, right? Where that meat can stretch out, not literally stretch out, but fall off the bone after simmering. So everybody gets a little bit of the protein. When you start getting into this, like one whole, a whole chicken breast, like unheard of, even the wing would have been a whole lot of meat for one person, the wing split. So that's another thing that's really interesting to me in terms of like refinding old lost food philosophies and ways to think about things in terms of individualistic and over the top and not gluttonous, but just kind of over, like just ostentatious, is that the word? Just a display of, like just over the top versus like a communally minded, like, how are we all going to eat this, not just today, but tomorrow and the next day. But yeah, and there's even an origination of the modern chicken to what was called the guinea hen that came out of a bird that comes that's part of us being here and it coming here and turning into the chicken that we know today in terms of being the cultivators of chickens and users of eggs and things like that. But yeah, you start to think about, and that would have been a very special occasion for and honestly, there's some indication that this fried chicken that is a gift to the world, one of the greatest delicacies ever created by the hands of Black cooks was.
Amen.
Yes, but I hope I don't get somebody will try to revoke my Black heart right now. But originally, that just based on what I just described, a platter of fried chicken, that would have been not something that we would have had access to enjoying until later, until when we incorporated into our holidays, our special occasions. Now people are like, fried chicken, special occasion. Well, I can eat it 3 times a day if I want, right? No, once upon a time, that was like, that never would have happened. And it was something that, becomes this delicacy that is presented. We have to think about the role, the critical role that we played. And it's not even just bifurcated. Sometimes it's trifurcated. Our food roles, the foods that we perfected and made, hence that tasting thing, right? If you got caught putting their utensils in your mouth, or like, can you imagine? But you're also responsible for making sure it's seasoned perfectly and like rocking a hard place, right? So of course you find ways to make sure you're doing, because that food's not for you. You're not sitting down to enjoy that. You're going to go back and you're going to pick the leaves, the edible, nutritious leaves that they're not even eating yet. Depending on what century we're in, which is why folks are living to 113 over here. Folks are dying at 35 over here, with their cookies and biscuits and, whatever. I digress. Did I even answer the question?
Yes. Yes,
you did. You answered it. I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Since you went into the fact about chicken, and that was something that we really didn't receive like that. It was more of a delicacy. Let's get into pork and how, because people are grossed out about chitlins and pig feet, and so let's get into something like that. Was that something that was in Africa at one point, or was it just the scraps, as everyone said, that was thrown to them and they had to make do?
That's a real complicated answer. The first answer is no. The pig is not native to Africa. I should know where he or she is native to, and that will come to me. But the point is, there were other game. So it's about thinking about things in terms of the same way the greens may not have been exactly been the same, the animals may not have exactly been the same, but the European cultures who settled here and enslaved people and brought them here had cultivated the pig. It had become very much a part of, and not just Europeans. The pig was a big deal in China, and still is, and it's got its place in different food cultures around the world, so yes, that became. But it's interesting. There have been archaeological digs done in the South where they find more beef bones in the areas where Black enslaved people would have lived, which I thought was interesting. More beef bones than pork. So, I mean, it just, it depends on the farmer and what they cultivated. But for us, we were doing the butchering for them and for their fine meals or whatever. And yes, there were, there's a term, high on the hog, literally means like, what's left by the time. And part of that is that dynamic, that relationship where there are accounts where people's animal labor would get more meat or protein, and I'm talking like dogs and whatever, than they would reserve for enslaved people. They also knew that people were hunting and fishing and foraging. Our ancestors had to make do from day one because they could not have relied on scraps from master's table, which is just a sliver of the narrative. And I'm not even sure that plays as big a role as we think it does. Rations, yes, because the slave system was a system, and to your point, Brian, they had to make sure that they kept people alive, that they give them calories. They were not thinking about whether the nutrition, they barely knew about nutrition for themselves. Let's be honest. We're talking about cultures that, showed up with, I'm not trying to be, snarky or whatever, but cheese, bread, and I'm at a loss for a lot of other stuff in terms of like when you look at tubers and rice and the amount of seafood that is part of the culture of African Americans today that are coming from a coastal people that are also brought to primarily coastal regions and regions with estuaries and rivers and there are a lot of things that nutritionally, our adoption of the yam, the sweet potato, not the yam. The yam is an African tuber that did not really make its way here, but the sweet potato looked like the yam, and it turns out that's much more nutritious than white potatoes and certain types of breads and stuff. So the things that we adopted, they call them superfoods. You turn on to these Blue Zone specials on PBS, and I'm like, where is the, what do you want to call us? Negro, Black, African American, Afro American. I don't want to call it the slave diet because that would be just ridiculous. But my point is that there are points in time where nutritionally, because of our own doing, our own supplementation, our own, the diet was healthier in some ways than modern African American diets. Not everywhere. You can't speak for everyone, but that kind of blows my mind too.
Thank you. I needed to know that because I like chitlins. So
I'm not mad at chitlins either.
So,
that's another example of turning literally nothing that anybody wanted into something that became a delicacy, and knowing how to do that, because there's health implications too.
Right.
Back to the cleanliness, back to making sure they're cleaned properly, cooked properly, salted properly. Salt and vinegar are antimicrobial, antibacterial agents in addition to flavor agents. So there's a science and an art to cooking.
We got a lot of chefs in that's on here, and they're putting it out there. Our cousin Oded, he coming with it. He was like, "Oh, the pig was from Europe too, or Europe or Asia, and the steer was in Africa. The longhorn steer. Oh yeah, so they coming with it. I love it.
But our barbecue techniques, Michael Twitty's done a lot of research on this, and I believe Adrian Miller has a whole book out about it. But they both illuminate totally different things, and the stuff that Twitty points out in terms of the game animals and how they were prepared and cooked were adapted to American barbecue style, which more often than not was pork. So yeah. So you guys are cousins. So I want to hear. What's this say? Is this a question or a comment? Oh. Tonya,
you're muted.
Sorry. She said, recall the former enslaved man, the peas, the beans, the turnips, the potatoes, all seasoned up, meats, and sometimes a ham bone was cooked in a big iron kettle. And when mealtime come, they all gathered around the pot for plenty of helpings. This took place at noon or whenever the field slaves were given a break from work. At the day's end, some semblance of family dinner would be prepared by a wife or mother in individual cabins. The diets high in fat and starch were not nutrition.
Mm-hmm. That's debatable whether or not for them it was nutritious, because when you're exerting that amount of calories and energy, it's an energy exchange. So that was absolutely nutritious. Fat is not the bad guy. Do not believe in this industrial system Western diet lie. Our brains are primarily fat. Good fats are important. And there's even, that's the thing. We live in a society that you literally could argue either side. I think I saw butter is back on the health food list. Like eggs fall on and off the health. Is it healthy? Are they not healthy? Butter, lard. Wait, remember when they told us coconut oil? Remember when they told us that saturated fats, or however it was positioned, like you were supposed to avoid those tropical oils like the plague. Remember? It was like, no.
Yeah.
Okay. Tropical oils that grow primarily in Black and brown societies, cultures, regions, whatever. How expensive is coconut oil now? People are eating it by the spoonfuls. They're using it for everything because it was never unhealthy. And the same thing. And people who are returning more to plant-based, but there's a whole nother camp that they came up with Crisco instead of lard because it was like, oh, that's terrible. Lard. Nope, lard's not so bad, it turns out. Now you got to respect people's preferences for like pork, no pork, whether it's religious or whatever. But it turns out there are arguments for the health benefits of using lard. I'm not telling you it. I'm just saying.
No, I'm just saying because I thought you was gonna put pork in there because I was gonna hear my mother's mouth afterwards because she's watching the show and she's gonna could you go fry me a pork chop, please, and stop trying to take it from me. Oops. So my sister that's gonna be between her and my sister. I don't have nothing to do with that.
And even the starches, a lot of those starches were high fiber. You got to look at. We're not talking processed. See, there's a difference between refined flours. Starches, which have only been in the human diet for, I don't know, 200, 250 years, That's not a very long time. That's like over processing, milling, grinding these fine white flours that are like talcum powder in your mouth. That that's a high load of no fiber. There's not a lot in there, right? A starch that comes in the form of a tuber or a breadfruit or a plantain or even certain forms of rice that some are higher in the grain and the fat. It's all relative. It's not that simple. So carbs and fats are not nutritious. It just
So the
depends on.
thing, oh, sorry.
No.
The, the
I'm
thing,
on a soapbox. Please get me off. Yeah.
the thing that I'm loving is our people are sharing their kind of family practices. So there is
And
Kathy Mullins say. So she's like, I know about the chicken. The younger you were, the smaller or the lesser piece you received. Sharon McAllister is saying the chicken neck was a delicacy for large families.
Aaron, my long lost sister cousin, I loved. Oh my goodness, my job, my sous chef job with my grandmother was dicing up the giblets and the neck and the heart, all the stuff.
Yes.
Like in
Do you know,
hindsight, I'm like, how old was I with that knife? Like child protective services, but I'm like, think about our ancestors. The children were right in there helping, whatever.
That's right.
And it's a gift to me to this day that I know my way around, but the neck, yeah.
but that's how I
Like,
make gravy. That's how I make gravy. To this day, that is how I make gravy.
The only way to make gravy.
That's the only way. Exactly. Giblet gravy during Thanksgiving is everything. It's everything.
Wait, where y'all? I'm coming right myself to because nobody makes it. You gotta ask, you gotta go to butchers now to get get that stuff. Like you buy a chicken, even a whole chicken, and they've taken it out. I don't know where the stuff is going.
No, look, let me tell you something. Every Thanksgiving or Christmas, one of my favorite things to do is to cut up celery and onions and put it in the pot because it's going to give me that smell that I need. And then chop them and boil them giblets and then chop them. Girl, what? Don't play with me. I told you, I'm a connoisseur of cooking. I do my thing.
Clearly. Because it's all about thinking through how you're gonna get flavor at every step. And that stuff, like people are like, ugh. But guess what? Now the latest craze is collagen. We don't get enough collagen in our diets anymore. Why don't we get enough collagen in our diets anymore? People stopped eating liver and the giblet gravy. I don't know where those innards are going. Maybe they're sending it to the cat food factory or something, because which is good because they need to eat that stuff too. But it's like society changes, decides that something, and then you got to go chase it down until you can't even chase it down.
I will fry me some chicken gizzards. I sure will. Yes, ma'am. I have a cousin who I have to put this up here. She says my dinner list is ready, Tonya, and looks like pork chops are going to be added. Let me tell you, every time I cook something, she puts up there, put that on my list, because I'll put a picture of it up, and she was like, put that on my list, put that on my list. So yeah, we
I mean, I gotta tell you, the pork industry has cleaned up its act, and now the one we got to be careful about is people thought they were eating cleaner by eating chicken, and oh my goodness, the white meat chicken thing. I've had it because I'm just like I can't with the skinless, boneless chicken breast trend. It's like, when is that going to end? Because and people do seem to be discovering thighs and legs and dark meat, which has all the flavor. But the point is, what was the point I was making, y'all? The point, the chicken industry. So chicken is like the #1 protein that is consumed in the United States. And once something becomes a thing, like where the machine is just cranking it out, you got to be suspicious if it's too cheap. But then it's also, you get used to it being like, chicken shouldn't be this expensive, because then when you had to go buy the free range, organic, whole, air chill, whatever, and I'm like, you want how much for that chicken? but you can taste the difference. And where I am here in New York, sometimes you can have access to halal chickens, butchered different ways, different culture, and you really do taste. It's like, oh, this is what it's almost like you time travel to taste what chicken really tasted like, versus something that has been that's too far along on the in the industrial system. So pork, has clean. It's all in cycles. But what I'm saying is, just wherever we can make conscientious choices. Part of what's driving the vegan trend and the vegetarian trend, which has roots, Black food culture roots, vegetarian especially, also of course Indian. But what's driving that is that the meat practices are just foul, pun intended, and to the point where there are serious health implications. It's not like when we hunted and the one thing and you ate that and then you didn't eat it again. You didn't until you hunted again a couple of months later. With this much volume and stuff, you just have to be careful. But it's not about individual choices. I wish we could find ways to change our ways, the collective ways of culture and society that we are part of.
My guess, and it's just a guess, is that if more people actually grew or raised their own food, because I'm toying with the idea of getting chickens. No roosters, because my neighbors would go bonkers. I live in the suburbs. Roosters would not go down well, but chickens are quiet. The hens are quieter. I'm actually contemplating getting hens. Egg layers, and I'd like to get some that could be, could be butchered, but definitely at least getting the egg layers.
Wow.
Because my relationship with food has really changed since COVID. I've had a COVID garden, so this is going into almost year 3. My relationship with kind of judging fresh food, and you want to talk about low food mileage, I just go to my backyard, go to the raised beds, pick what I need, and that's part of my dinner. It's awesome. It really is.
It's like magical, I'm sure. It's like, yeah, there is a bounty and abundance if you know how to, grow things. Get green
He's
thumb.
doing his thing because he made me a little baby watermelon, and I loved it. I loved it. It was absolutely delicious. He's doing his
My
thing.
grandfather used to grow watermelon.
What was it? The lettuce as well that you made, because it was perfect for my salad.
Oh, the butter lettuce and the arugula.
I love arugula and I love lettuce. I love leaves, edible leaves.
Yes. Well, we are almost out of time, Tonya. I'm so glad that.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
I know. I don't want you to leave when we get off. Brian, you want to tell him? Or I could tell him about next week's show. Next week's show is with my girl Yaya, Yael Gordon. We're going to go back to that. You guys remember the last time when she was up there and she was talking about those Louisiana slave plantations, where she's going to dig deeper into it, and she's going to talk about, guess what, Tonya, sugar canes, just like what you were just talking about.
Wow.
And you can't miss that show. That show is going to be awesome. So we are really excited about that. But again, Tonya, we have to keep in touch. Do not hang up. And
no, I won't. And I wish I got to tell you guys about the food family tree segment we're developing in the Savory and Sweet show, because based on your cousins and the people posting things, it sounds like there's something there in terms of mapping out family trees with the people.
Come back and talk about that
and grow. That would be great.
Yes.
Or if it's something that the audience can tune into or listen to, shoot us a link and we'll put it out through our network.
Yes,
I've been putting it up. She's with Word. What is it? Word.com radio or wordradio.com.
Yes, and you can also go to the Food Griot. But the food family tree thing, actually want to have more conversations with genealogists. I am not a genealogist, but we'll talk. We'll keep the conversation going.
Yes. So we're a minute out. So I'm Tonya, and I'm so glad you guys joined us today.
I'm Brian. Equally happy you guys shared your Sunday afternoon with us. And looking forward to seeing you 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time right here.
All right. Bye, guys. Stay on, Tonya.
Bye-bye.